In the scorching heat of a Montana summer, where the sun beats down mercilessly on the rolling plains of Sweetwater Valley, a story unfolds that will challenge everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and the price of pride. What happens when a father's stubbornness collides with a daughter's unwavering spirit, and an unlikely four-legged hero steps in to deliver justice? This isn't just another tale from the American West, it's a journey into the dark corners of human nature, where secrets buried deep in the prairie soil are about to surface in the most unexpected way. The Mackenzie Ranch stretched across 3,000 acres of prime Montana grassland, its weathered fences marking boundaries that had stood for 4 generations. Old Samuel Mackenzie ruled his domain with an iron fist, his weathered face carved by decades of harsh winters and scorching summers. At 68, he moved with the deliberate gait of a man who had spent his entire life wrestling with the unforgiving land, and his gray eyes held the coldness of someone who had learned that sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. His daughter Emma, 23 years old, with auburn hair that caught fire in the morning sun, had inherited her father's determination but none of his cruelty. She worked the ranch with a passion that ran deeper than duty, her hands gentle, with the animals yet strong enough to handle the most stubborn cattle. But on this particular Tuesday morning in July, Emma's usual vitality was replaced by the telltale flush of fever and the trembling that comes with illness fighting its way through a weakened body. The mercury had already climbed past 90 degrees by 8 in the morning, and the weather forecast promised another scorcher that would push temperatures well into the triple digits. Emma had barely slept the night before, her body alternating between chills that made her teeth chatter and waves of heat that left her sheets soaked with perspiration. She knew she should stay in bed, should call her father and explain that she needed just one day to recover. But the memory of his last tirade about weakness and excuses kept her from reaching for the phone. Samuel Mackenzie had made it clear on numerous occasions that the ranch didn't stop for anyone's convenience, not even his own daughter's, and the herd of prize Arabian horses needed their daily care regardless of human frailty. So Emma dragged herself from her small cabin on the eastern edge of the property, splashed cold water on her burning face, and prepared to face another day under her father's unforgiving scrutiny. The main barn stood like a cathedral in the center of the ranch complex, its red paint faded to the color of dried blood, its massive doors open to catch whatever breeze might offer relief from the oppressive heat. Inside, 23 horses moved restlessly in their stalls, their coats already dark with sweat despite the early hour. May's favorite among them was Thunder, a magnificent black stallion with eyes that seemed to hold an almost human intelligence, and a temperament that had earned him a reputation as both the most beautiful and most unpredictable animal on the ranch. Thunder had been her companion since she was 16, the two of them forming a bond that transcended the usual relationship between human and horse. And Emma often found herself confiding in the stallion during her darkest moments, as if he understood every word she spoke. Samuel appeared in the barn doorway at exactly 8:30, his routine as predictable as sunrise, carrying a cup of black coffee and wearing the same stern expression that had intimidated ranch hands for decades. He took one look at his daughter's pale complexion and the way she gripped the stall door for support, and his jaw tightened with disapproval rather than concern. In his worldview, illness was a sign of weakness, a character flaw that could be overcome through sheer determination and hard work, and he had no patience for what he saw as Emma's attempt to avoid her responsibilities. The fact that she had shown up despite feeling terrible should have earned his respect. But Samuel Mackenzie was a man who had forgotten how to show appreciation, his heart hardened by years of loss and disappointment that had taught him to trust only in his own strength. As Emma moved through her morning tasks, feeding the horses and checking their water supplies, her father's criticism followed her like a shadow, his voice cutting through the humid air with the precision of a blade. He found fault with everything she did, from the way she measured the grain to the speed at which she cleaned the stalls, his words designed to push her harder rather than acknowledge the obvious signs of her deteriorating condition. Emma's temperature continued to climb as the morning wore on, her vision occasionally blurring as waves of dizziness washed over her. But she pressed forward with the stubborn determination that was perhaps the only trait she truly shared with her father. The other ranch hands watched from a distance, their faces showing the concern that Samuel refused to express. But none of them dared to intervene in the ongoing drama between father and daughter. But here's where our story takes its first unexpected turn, the moment that would change everything and reveal secrets that had been hidden for over 2 decades. As Emma struggled to lift a heavy bucket of water for Thunder's stall, her legs gave way beneath her and she collapsed against the wooden partition, her face flushed with fever and her breathing shallow and rapid. Samuel's reaction wasn't the rush of paternal concern you might expect, but rather an explosion of anger that seemed disproportionate even for his famously short temper. He stormed across the barn, his boots echoing against the concrete floor, and began berating Emma with a viciousness that shocked even the horses into silence, his words revealing a resentment that went far deeper than disappointment in a sick daughter's performance. What Emma didn't know, what no one on the ranch knew except Samuel himself, was that her collapse had triggered memories of another woman who had fallen ill on this same spot 24 years earlier. Her mother, Mary Mackenzie, had suffered a similar collapse in the very same barn, on a day when Samuel had pushed her to work, despite her protests of feeling unwell. Mary had been pregnant with Emma at the time, and what Samuel had dismissed as morning sickness had actually been the early signs of a serious condition that would ultimately claim her life just 3 months after Emma's birth. The guilt that Samuel carried over his wife's death had poisoned his relationship with his daughter from the very beginning, because every time he looked at Emma, he saw the woman he had failed to protect, the woman whose warnings he had ignored. Until it was too late, Thunder sensed the tension in the barn long before the humans realized how dangerous the situation had become. The stallion's ears flattened against his head as Samuel's voice rose to a roar, his powerful body shifting restlessly in his stall as his protective instincts toward Emma warred with his training to obey human commands. Horses are creatures of extraordinary emotional intelligence, capable of reading human moods and intentions with an accuracy that often surpasses our own understanding of ourselves. And Thunder had been watching the dynamic between father and daughter with growing concern for months. He had seen Emma's gradual deterioration under her father's relentless criticism, had felt her tears when she thought no one was watching, had witnessed the way her spirit was slowly being crushed under the weight of trying to earn love from a man who had forgotten how to give it. As Samuel grabbed Emma by the arm and hauled her to her feet, his grip tight enough to leave bruises, something snapped in Thunder's ancient equine brain. The stallion had never been aggressive toward humans, had always been the model of good behavior despite his size and strength. But the sight of Emma being manhandled by her own father triggered a protective response that overrode years of careful training. With a sound that was part whinny and part war cry, Thunder reared up on his hind legs, his front hooves pawing the air as he prepared to defend the young woman who had shown him nothing but kindness and respect throughout their years. Together, the stall door, weakened by years of hard use and the recent dry weather that had caused the wood to shrink, gave way under the force of Thunder's assault. And suddenly, 1,500 pounds of angry stallion was loose in the barn. Samuel turned just in time to see Thunder bearing down on him, the horse's eyes blazing with an intelligence and purpose that no rational person would expect from an animal. And for the first time in decades, the old rancher felt genuine fear course through his veins. He released Emma's arm and stumbled backward, but Thunder wasn't interested in escape or random destruction. His focus was entirely on the man who had been hurting his beloved friend. With surgical precision, the stallion used his massive head to shove Samuel backward, step by calculated step, until the old man found himself pressed against the far wall of the barn, with nowhere to run and no way to defend himself against an opponent who outweighed him by more than 1,000 pounds. The confrontation that followed lasted only minutes, but those minutes would haunt Samuel Mackenzie for the rest of his life, forcing him to confront truths about himself that he had spent decades trying to avoid. Thunder didn't attack in the way a wild animal might, with teeth and hooves designed to kill, but instead used his bulk and intelligence to pin Samuel against the wall. His great head pressed against the man's chest, while his dark eyes seemed to look directly into Samuel's soul. It was as if the horse was saying, without words, that the cycle of abuse and neglect had to end, that Emma deserved better than a father who took out his own pain and guilt on the one person in the world who still loved him unconditionally. During those terrifying moments, pressed against the rough wooden planks with Thunder's breath hot on his face, Samuel experienced something that psychologists call a moment of clarity, a sudden lifting of the emotional barriers that had protected him from his own conscience. For so many years, he saw himself as Thunder saw him, as Emma saw him, as the world saw him, not as the strong, uncompromising patriarch he imagined himself to be, but as a bitter old man who had allowed grief and self-hatred to poison every relationship in his life. The realization hit him like a physical blow, more painful than any injury Thunder might have inflicted, and for the first time since Mary's death, Samuel Mackenzie began to cry. Emma, who had been watching the confrontation with a mixture of fear and fascination despite her fever, saw her father's emotional breakdown and felt something shift in her own heart as well. For years, she had tried to earn his approval, had pushed herself beyond her limits in a desperate attempt to prove her worth, but she had never understood the source of his anger and disappointment until this moment. Seeing him reduced to tears by a horse's intervention, she began to piece together the puzzle of her father's behavior, remembering fragments of conversations she had overheard between the ranch hands, stories about her mother's death that had always been told in whispers. And the picture that emerged was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Heartbreaking because she finally understood her father's pain, and infuriating because she realized how much of her own life had been sacrificed to his inability to process his grief in a healthy way. Thunder seemed to sense that his message had been delivered and received, because after what felt like an eternity but was probably no more than 5 minutes, he stepped back from Samuel and walked calmly to where Emma stood swaying on her feet. The stallion nuzzled her gently, his earlier aggression completely gone, replaced by the tender concern of a friend who had just fought a battle on her behalf. Emma wrapped her arms around Thunder's neck, drawing strength from his solid presence while her father slowly slid down the wall to sit on the barn floor, his face buried in his hands as 24 years of suppressed emotion finally found its voice. The aftermath of Thunder's intervention brought changes to the Mackenzie Ranch that no one could have predicted, starting with Samuel's insistence that Emma see a doctor immediately rather than continue working through her illness. The fever that had seemed like such a minor concern that morning turned out to be the early sign of pneumonia, a potentially serious condition that could have been life-threatening if left untreated, especially in the oppressive heat of the Montana summer. As Samuel sat in the hospital waiting room while Emma received treatment, he was forced to confront the terrifying possibility that he might lose his daughter the same way he had lost his wife, through his own stubborn refusal to take her health concerns seriously. The doctor who treated Emma was a young woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, recently graduated from medical school and still idealistic enough to believe that healing involved more than just prescribing medication. She recognized the complex family dynamics at play in the Mackenzie case and took the time to sit down with both father and daughter to discuss not just Emma's physical recovery, but the emotional wounds that had been festering for years. Dr. Chen had grown up on a ranch herself, understood the culture of toughness and self-reliance that often prevented people like Samuel from seeking help when they needed it most, and she approached the conversation with the perfect blend of medical authority and rural common sense that both Emma and Samuel could respect. During Emma's 3-day hospital stay, Samuel found himself spending more time talking to his daughter than he had in the previous 5 years combined, their conversations gradually moving from safe topics, like ranch business, to the more dangerous territory of feelings and memories. Emma learned about her mother's illness and death, about Samuel's overwhelming guilt and his misguided belief that showing emotion was a sign of weakness that would dishonor Mary's memory. Samuel, for his part, began to understand how his attempts to make Emma stronger had actually been slowly destroying her spirit, how his fear of losing her had created the very distance he had been trying to prevent. The story of Thunder's intervention spread through the small community of Sweetwater Valley like wildfire, growing and changing with each telling until it became the stuff of local legend. Some people claimed the horse had actually spoken to Samuel, delivering a message from beyond the grave, while others insisted that Thunder had been trained by Emma to attack on command as part of some elaborate plan to teach her father a lesson. The truth, as Samuel and Emma knew, was both simpler and more complex than any of the rumors suggested. Sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes it takes an outside perspective to see clearly what has been hidden by years of pain and misunderstanding. But the most significant change came in the relationship between Samuel and Thunder, who had gone from being just another horse on the ranch to something approaching a family member in Samuel's eyes. The old rancher found himself spending hours in Thunder's stall, talking to the stallion about Mary, about his fears for Emma's future, about the loneliness that had eaten away at his heart for more than 2 decades. Thunder listened with the patience that only animals seem to possess, occasionally nuzzling Samuel's shoulder or resting his great head against the man's chest in a gesture that felt remarkably like forgiveness. As autumn arrived in Sweetwater Valley, painting the prairie grass gold and bringing relief from the oppressive heat of summer, the Mackenzie Ranch had transformed into something resembling a real home for the first time since Mary's death. Samuel had hired additional help to reduce Emma's workload, had installed air conditioning in the main barn to protect both horses and workers from extreme temperatures, and had even begun talking about expanding the operation to include a therapeutic writing program for local children with disabilities. Emma, her health fully restored and her relationship with her father slowly healing, had enrolled in online courses toward a degree in veterinary medicine, a dream she had abandoned years earlier when Samuel convinced her that the ranch needed her full-time attention. The changes weren't always easy or smooth, because decades of hurt and misunderstanding can't be erased overnight, and both Samuel and Emma had moments when they fell back into old patterns of behavior. Samuel still struggled with his tendency to see illness or tiredness as weakness, and Emma still sometimes pushed herself too hard in an attempt to prove her worth. But they had learned to recognize these moments and address them before they escalated into the kind of destructive confrontation that had nearly cost them their relationship entirely. Dr. Chen continued to check in with the family periodically, not as a medical professional but as a friend who had helped them navigate one of the most difficult periods of their lives. Thunder, meanwhile, had earned a permanent place in the ranch's hierarchy that went far beyond his role as just another horse in the stable. Samuel had moved him to the largest stall in the barn, had upgraded his feed to the highest quality available, and had even commissioned a local craftsman to create a special halter with Thunder's name engraved in silver letters. But perhaps more importantly, Thunder had regained his trust in humans, his faith that the people in his life would treat him with the respect and kindness he deserved, and his willingness to form deep emotional bonds with the humans who cared for him. The story of what happened that hot July morning became a touchstone for the Mackenzie family, a reminder of how close they had come to losing each other completely, and how much strength could be found in forgiveness and understanding. Emma would often tell visitors about Thunder's intervention, always emphasizing that the horse hadn't been violent or destructive, but rather had acted with the kind of moral clarity that humans often struggle to achieve, seeing straight to the heart of a problem and taking decisive action to solve it. Samuel, who had once been skeptical of anyone who attributed human-like emotions or intelligence to animals, became one of Thunder's most vocal advocates, insisting to anyone who would listen that horses were capable of understanding and responding to human emotions in ways that most people never realized. Years later, when Emma had become a successful veterinarian and had taken over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch, she would still begin each morning by visiting Thunder in his stall, sharing the events of the previous day and asking for his opinion on various decisions she needed to make. Samuel, now in his 70s but still sharp and engaged with ranch life, had developed his own morning ritual of bringing Thunder carrots and apples while discussing the weather forecast and any concerns he might have about the day ahead. The three of them had formed an unlikely family unit, bound together by shared experience and mutual respect rather than just biology or ownership, and their story had become legendary throughout the ranching community of Montana and beyond. The lessons learned from that summer day extended far beyond the boundaries of the Mackenzie Ranch, inspiring other families to examine their own relationships and communication patterns, encouraging parents to listen more carefully to their children's needs, and reminding everyone who heard the story that healing often comes from unexpected sources and that it's never too late to change destructive patterns of behavior. Emma eventually established a foundation dedicated to improving communication between parents and children in rural communities, using Thunder as a therapy horse and spokes animal for the importance of treating all living beings with compassion and respect. Samuel lived to see his grandchildren born and raised on the ranch, watching with pride as they learned to ride and care for horses under Emma's patient guidance, and he never tired of telling them the story of how Thunder had saved their family from destroying itself through pride and stubbornness. Thunder himself lived to the remarkable age of 32, spending his final years as the beloved patriarch of the ranch's growing herd, teaching younger horses and humans alike about the power of loyalty, courage, and unconditional love. The barn where Thunder had made his famous stand was eventually renovated and expanded, but Samuel insisted that the original stall where the confrontation had taken place be preserved exactly as it was, complete with the broken door that had never been properly repaired. A small plaque near the entrance told visitors the story of what had happened there, and why the Mackenzie family believed that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, reminding everyone who read it that love sometimes requires us to fight for the people we care about, even when they don't seem to appreciate our efforts. And so the story of the grumpy rancher, his dedicated daughter, and the horse who changed everything became part of the folklore of Sweetwater Valley, passed down from generation to generation as a reminder that family relationships require constant attention and care, that pride can be more destructive than any external enemy, and that sometimes it takes an outside perspective, even from a four-legged friend, to help us see clearly what we've been missing all along.